Well, good day, folks, and welcome back to another exciting and perhaps entertaining episode of The Secret Solve. This is the program where we look through the book The Secret and try to determine what the authors, artists, and the publisher were up to in 1982. And today's presentation is on the Werner von Brownie, the Werner von Brownie, otherwise known as the Insider El de Fugere. Oh, come on, baby, set my pants on fire. Yes, that's what we're talking about today. The great igniters. But before we get started, I wanted to just add from the previous presentation a little information about the Smoking the Bandit. Because if you look at the 175 page image, you will have a picture of what I believe to be T. Justice from the movie Smoking the Bandit. And indeed, we have here a picture of Ralph Cramden himself smoking a cornpipe. So we're now in the transition mode, moving from Atlanta and all of the information about Atlanta, Terra, Gone with the Wind, etc. Uh, and we're moving back to another city, folks. So let's look at the Werner von Brownie himself. Otherwise, people think and are probably correct in their assessment that we indeed are talking about rocketry, a trip to the moon. Perhaps a moon landing will occur later on. So, basically, we're talking about Werner Magnus Maximilian Freiherr von Braun, otherwise known as a German and American aerospace engineer and space architect. He was a member of the Nazi Party and the SS. As a young man, von Braun worked in Germany's rocket development program. He helped design and co-develop the V-2 rocket during World War II. And uh, the V-2 became the first artificial object to travel into space on June 20, 1944. How about that? So we're talking about things that go up in the air, like fireworks, and some that go up in the air and go boom, and then come crashing back down. Okay, his group assimilated into NASA. He was the father of NASA, where he served as the director of the newly formed Marshall Space Flight Center. He was the chief architect of the Saturn V super heavy lift launch vehicle that propelled the Apollo spacecraft to the moon. Apollo. Houston, we have a problem because it's not Houston, it's Dallas. Okay, all right. I don't think we're talking about Houston having a problem. I think we are talking about the earlier people that arrived on the moon and went into space. So, the world's first large scale experimental rocket program was the Opel RAK under the leadership of Fritz von Opel and Max Oballer in the 1920s. Um, he was in the Nazi regime. He worked under the Nazi regime. We talked about his major accomplishments there. We talked about his experiments with rocketry. Part is transitioning from the slave aspect of the previous story. We now get into the story of SS General Hans Kammler, who was an engineer and had started several concentration camps, including Auschwitz. Had a reputation of brutality and had originated the idea of using concentration camp prisoners as slave laborers in the rocket program. Arthur Rudolph, chief engineer of the V-2 rocket factory, endorsed the idea in April of 43 when a labor shortage developed. More people died building the V-2 rockets than were killed by it as a weapon. Okay, so we basically have a transition from one article to another with that information. In the U.S. Army career, von Braun, in 1944, United States Edward Stidlness Jr. approved the transfer of von Braun and his specialist to the United States. So here he comes. Shows up in Darrowell. Then they were flown to Boston, Massachusetts, and taken by boat to the Army Intelligence Service Post at Fort Strong in the Boston Harbor. So in the previous article, we talked about a Long Island. Guess what? Fort Strong is a former U.S. Army Coast Artillery fort that occupied the northern third of Long Island in Boston Harbor. So the Long Island that they're referring to in the previous story is not the Long Island in New York, but the Long Island in Boston. Because again, we transition from one story to the next. So we're talking about some time in El Paso and at Fort Bliss and White Sands, Proving Grounds in New Mexico, and the George O'Keeffe story and Huntsville, Alabama. So he basically goes to a number of different places. And eventually he develops, a various concepts, a Mars project, in the hope that its involvement would bring about greater public interest in the future of the space program. Von Braun also began working with Walt Disney and the Disney Studios as a technical director, initially for 3 television films about space exploration. The initial broadcast devoted to space exploration was Man in Space, which first went on the air 9 March 1955. It drew 40 million viewers. So here we have the Von Brownie, and again, many of these times, these people run into each other. And that's how you know you got the right person, is they run into each other. And the fact that the space shuttle is seen in one of the images. So, so the fourth stage provided an acceleration to lunar escape velocity, while the film stage would be responsible for decelerating during return to Earth to a residual speed capture of the spacecraft, ending in a runway landing, much as in the way of the space shuttle. So the concept of that type of occurs there. So he converted to a Lutheran religion. So now, he's now a Lutheran and joined the church. He came up with the concept of orbital warfare. Again, and then he went to NASA. Okay, after NASA, he became vice president of engineering and development for an aerospace company, Fairchild Industries, in Maryland. He died in 1973. He died of kidney cancer. So that's kind of the Von Brownie and who he was. Okay, so the story mentions the 3 Mile Island accident, and I'll just refer to this again. On March 28th, 1979, it was the most significant accident in U.S. commercial nuclear power plant history on a set, and it happened at near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Basically, could have been a big boom, but it was just only a partial meltdown of a nuclear reactor. And so I don't see a whole lot in this particular piece that could get you any information on that, but I don't know. The 3 Mile Islands, President Jimmy Carter commissioned a study report the president's condition on the accident of 3 Mile Island in 1979. Admiral Hyman Rickover was asked to testify before Congress regarding why naval nuclear propulsion, as used in submarines, has succeeded in achieving a record of 0 reactor incidents as opposed to these on-land facilities. Okay, so that's the bit on that. So it mentions specifically from Santa Barbara to Cape Canaveral. And we all pretty much know that Cape Canaveral is the place of the Kennedy Space Center. Thank you very much, Kennedy Space Center. Now, let's just look at where Cape Canaveral is in relationship to Orlando. And then let's look at it in relationship to St. Augustine. I was going to bet that an article that mentions Walt Disney in it, or doesn't mention it, but who has Werner von Brownie, who made movies for Walt Disney as a consultant, I would suspect that von Brownie would be spending more time in Walt Disney World than they would be at the Fountain of Youths. Oh, I get it, George Ward. You have been playing us all along. It's the Fountain of Youths. Utah, Utah, Utah. You've been right along. You just been in the wrong state with the wrong puzzle. Okay, Santa Barbara. Okay, Santa Barbara is the home of the Vandenberg Space Base. Okay, so that will get you what Vandenberg, the Santa Barbara reference. So the Santa Barbara, the U.S. Army at Camp Cook is where this all started out, and Camp Cook is named after Major General Philip St. George Cook. Okay, we got another Major General mentioned here. Okay, General Cook was a cavalry officer whose military career spanned almost half a century, beginning with his graduation from West Point in 1827. He participated in the Mexican War, Indian War, Civil War. A native of Virginia, General Cook remained loyal to the Union during the Civil War. Perhaps his most enduring achievement came when he was colonel during the Mexican-American War, and he led a battalion of Mormons from Missouri to California. That's right. We've now been introduced to the Vandenberg Space Force Base. Now, we don't ever get introduced to these things directly by just saying, instead of Barbara, and they give you Cape Canaveral. Well, Cape Canaveral is the easy one because we all know that's Kennedy. And that gets us to Kennedy, another reference to Kennedy. But this one's a little more difficult, and you have to do the work, where you find General Philip St. George Cook led a battalion of Mormons from Missouri to California. Wow. In the same article, it mentions including the beekeeping Brownies of Cornwall. Well, we'll get to them in a moment. But if you know the Mormon and Mormonism, you'll know that the beekeeper has a significant meaning to the Mormon religion. And the fact that the significant accomplishment of Camp Cook was the Mormons, have we talked about the somebody that's went from Missouri to California. Several other times we have had this happen. Okay. All right. So enough about the Camp Cook aspect of this. So it's let's get into the rocketry period where we're talking about the ballistic missile testing. So we had the Cold War, and one of the things that probably led the Soviet Union to be getting their underpants in a bunch is the PGM-17 Thor and the SM-65 Atlas program, both of which have a recurring theme as being developed at the Vandenberg Air Force Base and launched from this particular location. We had a whole Atlas program designed where we basically spent a whole lot of money, dug a bunch of holes in the ground, put missiles in them all across the United States in different locations. Then we negotiated the SALT Treaty, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, with the Soviet Union, and we decommissioned facilities after spending millions and 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 millions of dollars, and in today's money, billions, to develop these rocket systems. Basically shut down almost immediately after we developed the program. Okay, so this So next, the Vandenberg Air Force Base uh, gets converted over to the first polar orbit satellite, Discovery 1. It was launched in 1959, and it mentioned in this article the satellite that got lost, that vanishes from orbit. Uh, so this takes you directly to the Discovery 1 in the satellite program. Then we move into the space shuttle. In 72, Vandenberg was selected as the West Coast Space Shuttle launch and landing site. But it was never used to do such. So uh, anyway, it was one of the possible launch and landing sites for this. Okay, well that's about the time that Byron Price ended his tour of this. So the STS is the first launch of the space shuttle occurred April 12, 1981, exactly 20 years after the first manned space flight, and the orbiter Columbia lifted off from a pad at the Kennedy Space Center. Okay, so some people think they see a space shuttle. Well, as of 1981, there probably was only one launch. The name of it was Columbia. And remember earlier we talked about this whole theme of progress, the whole theme of manifest destiny. And I pointed out earlier that there was a famous painting, and the name of the person that was stringing the telephone lines from one coast to the other was Columbia. So again, the second appearance of Columbia. Uh, it marked the first time that solid fuel rockets were used for a NASA crewed launch. And down here at the end, it says the development of solid fuel along with gasoline fuel and steam power. So again, we probably have the information that we need from the space shuttle. John Young was an astronaut. He's a naval officer, aeronautical engineer, ninth person to walk on the moon. And so I don't know why I'm bringing him up, but he was born in St. Luke's Hospital in San Francisco. He lost his job his father lost his job during the Great Depression, and the family moved to Cartersville, Georgia in 1932. In 36, the family moved to Orlando, Florida, where he attended an elementary school there. And then he went to the Orlando High School. He completed a midshipman cruise aboard the USS Missouri, where he worked along his future Apollo 10 crewmate Thomas Stafford. He was a naval and he became a gunnery pilot. He had a NASA career. He was selected to join the NASA 2 group in 1962. He was involved in Project Gemini. So I'm not sure why I threw this guy in here, but I did. Robert Crippen, he was also part of the Manned Orbiting Laboratory Skylab Medical Experiment Altitude Test, otherwise called a SMEAT. He was on the space shuttle. This guy was on the first space shuttle mission. Crippen was commissioned through the United States Navy's Aviation Officer Cadet School program at the Naval Air Station, Pensacola, Florida. He also spent time at Whiting Field in Florida. And he also was a Naval Air Station at Chase Field in Beeville, Texas. So this is why I threw this in, is because I believe Young and Crippen were the two guys that was on the first STS flight. Now we've gotten to the beehive, haven't we? They're referring to Beeville, Texas, and this guy that he was on the first shuttle program, and that's why I threw the young guy in there as well. New tab, no information. Oh, I left this out in the last part, so I'm going to come back to him. So in the last presentation, I alluded to the fact, and in this one, in the image, I alluded to the fact that I think the guy holding his ears is none other than the guy in Smokey and the Bandit, Ralph Cramden, otherwise known as Buford T. Justice, otherwise known as, I can't think of his name, but a co-star in that movie was Jerry Reed Hubbard. He was an American singer, guitarist, songwriter. He penned the Eastbound and Down, Roll 'em Up and Truck 'em song and Convoy. No, that wasn't no, sorry, he didn't do Convoy. That was another guy. Oh, so basically, he was born in Atlanta. So I think Jerry Reed, born in Atlanta, goes along with all the other themes in the previous story. But he graduated from O'Keefe High School, and O'Keefe High School, founded by Georgia O'Keefe. No, not really. It was actually Daniel O'Keefe, who largely was responsible for setting up all of the schools in Atlanta. The father of the Atlanta School District is Daniel O'Keefe. Reed married Priscilla Prissy Mitchell in 1959. They had 2 daughters. So, remember in the story, we had Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind was written by Margaret Mitchell. So Jerry Reed plays into the fact that he was in the movie Smokey and the Bandit. He is from Atlanta. Gone with the Wind is a story about Atlanta, and Reed marries a Priscilla Prissy Mitchell. You see how they wrote these stories? This is how they wrote all of them. It's just a matter of figuring out what they wrote and what was important about the story. And there's the connection, Atlanta connection. He was also considered the guitar. He wrote a song, a guitar man. Me and Chet, another song. We could go through his whole entire discography if you want. But one of the things that Jerry Reed famously did and said in an interview with Johnny Carson was that he actually took a military flight in a plane with the pilots at the Air Force Base. And so there's a famous show recorded of Jerry Reed and talking about his flight in an F whatever. It's pretty cool. Reed married. The daughters. He died in Nashville. The Roadhammers performed Eastbound and Down as a tribute when he died. Okay, so Jerry Reed, Daniel O'Keefe, got him covered. Okay, so the cornpipe. So you may notice in the image here, or maybe you didn't notice, but I'm going to point it out. On page 175 in the book, we have Buford T. Justice, who smoked all the time in the movie Smokey and the Bandit. By the way, Smokey and the Bandit, get it? This story is about incendiary devices, smoke, if you will. Kaboom! The corncob pipe, folks, is the Missouri Meerschaum Company. It's a tobacco smoking pipe manufacturer located in Washington, Missouri. It is the world's oldest and largest manufacturer of corncob pipes. Corncob pipe featured in this image for a reason. The company was founded in 1869 when Dutch-American woodworker Henry Tibby began producing the corncob pipe and selling them in his shop. Tibbs likened the pipes to Meerschaum pipes and thus named them Missouri Meerschaums. And so he patented his method of fireproofing the pipes by applying a plaster-like substance to the outside of the cob. So this is similar to like the tiles on the space shuttle. And the space shuttle famously had a big debate as to whether or not it would be able to be an ongoing program because in its first flight, it lost a bunch of tiles on the outside of the air of the space module when it returned to Earth. And it was this big, question that was debated in the media in 1981 was the loss of the flame retardant outside tiles on the space shuttle. Well, let's look a little further at the Meerschaum pipe because it's in the image. So basically, Meerschaum is originally named Meerschaum by Abraham Gottlob Werner. Oh my God, it's just not Werner van Brownie that's important. It's Werner. In 1788, it was named Sapoliolite by, anyway. So the name comes from the Greek sepion, S-E-P-I-O-N, meaning cuttlebone. And the cuttlebone is the porous internal shell of the cuttlefish. And I will, at this point in time, point you to an image of a cuttlefish, but I will help you a little bit with the cuttlefish image. The cuttlefish looks kind of like a blimp, or it kind of looks like a Hindenburg, or it kind of looks like an oblong spaceship, or it kind of looks like the tabernacle in Salt Lake City, Utah. So we've now basically got a corncob pipe and a story about beehives, right? And beehives being an important aspect of the Salt Lake City people. And we had just talked about one of the previous people who had led a good number of Missourians to California. And now I have a Missouri cuttlefish leading a group of people to Salt Lake City in this article. So the Missouri Meerschaum, which is that pipe that you're looking at, and its origins. So maybe I still haven't figured out what the Cornwall is about because we mentioned the Cornwall again. And I haven't, the steam engine has got so many different aspects to it that I haven't been able to figure out, what it is about the steam engine that's important to be mentioned in the article. The other one is the Barber. In 1791, John Barber developed the gas turbine. In 1794, Thomas Mead patented a gas engine. But I don't know if any of these have the correct information. However, I do like Rudolf Diesel because Diesel has been mentioned a few times in this back of the book. And so I like Rudolf Diesel for that very reason. And Rudolf Diesel developed the first compressed charge compression ignition engine. Rudolf Diesel. Rudolf Christian Karl Diesel was a German inventor and mechanical engineer. He invented the diesel engine, which burns a diesel fuel. Both are named after him. So he's a Paris, France guy. He's a Franco-Prussian War guy. His uncle taught him mathematics. One of his professors was Karl von Lind, and he graduated. He graduated, or no, he was unable to graduate because he got ill with typhoid fever. So he started working in Switzerland. He moved to Berlin, and so Diesel worked on the design of an internal combustion engine that could approach the maximum theoretical thermal efficiency of a Carnot cycle. So the reason I really like Diesel is because on the evening of 29 September 1933, Diesel boarded the Great Eastern Railway steamer SS Dresden in Antwerp on his way to a meeting of the Consolidated Diesel Manufacturing Company in London. He took dinner on board the ship and then retired to his cabin at about 10 o'clock, leaving word to be called the next morning at 6:15 a.m. But he was never seen alive again. In the morning, his cabin was empty and his bed had not been slept in. Although his nightshirt was neatly laid out and his watch had been left there, it could have been seen from the bed. His hat and neatly folded overcoat were discovered beneath the after-deck railing. His hat and coat were beneath the after-deck railing. Shortly after his appearance, his wife Martha opened a bag that her husband had given to her just before his ill-fated voyage, with directions that it should not be opened until the following week. She discovered basically $120,000 USA Today cash and financial statements indicating that their bank accounts were virtually empty. Any Dyer Diesel brought with him on the ship for the date 29 September 1913. A cross was drawn, possibly indicating death. 10 days after he was last seen, the crew of the Dutch pilot boat Kortsen came upon his corpse, or a corpse of a man floating in the eastern Scheldt. The body was in such an advanced state of decomposition that it was unrecognizable, and they did not retain it aboard because of heavy weather. Instead, the crew returned personal items, a pill case, the Pilgrim, a wallet, ID card, pocket knife, and eyeglass case. Oh, maybe that's why that pair of glasses is on that image that are weird. From the clothing of a dead man, and returned the body to the sea. They were identified by Rudolph's son, Eugene Diesel, as belonging to his father. So there's been some speculation as to why he ended up out there. But there's still a speculation today on the West Coast, just off of Santa Barbara, near Catalina Island, where on a fateful night, Natalie Wood ended up in the same perilous predicament as Mr. Diesel. Okay, so we talked about Diesel. Next we have to talk about Werner von Braunie's buddy. Werner von Brownie famously was a person who communicated quite often with Jack Whiteside Parsons, born Marvel Whiteside Parsons. He's a rocket engineer, chemist, and Thelemite occultist. Thelemite, did you know that an explosive, I think, what is the name? Isn't Thelemite the name of oh no, that's Tannerite, excuse me. Oh boy, I was close. Anyway, Tannerite is an explosive, but I'll take a Thelemite any day. Why not? Because he's associated with Caltech and the JPL. And anything that has to do with the rocket engine in this story, I'm perfectly happy with. So Parsons was born in LA and was raised by a wealthy family on Orange Grove Boulevard in Pasadena. Always like when I find an orange in here. In Pasadena, I don't mind finding Pasadena and Stanford for that matter. He was, because any of these could be, a possible solve. But the fact that we have, a thelema in Marxism, he converted to thelema from Marxism. Whenever we have somebody involved in that, it always hits me as being this. So in 45, Parsons, okay, so basically in 1945, he separated from his wife Helen after having an affair with her sister Sarah. When Sarah left him for L. Ron Hubbard, Parsons conducted the Babylon Working, a series of rituals intended to evoke the Thelemitic goddess of Babylon. Okay, this is where you get into the intersection of cults, L. Ron Hubbard, and the Scientology, and the importance that religion and some of these religious things. So he was born in the Good Samaritan Hospital in Los Angeles. The parents had moved from California, from Massachusetts. So he became interested in rocketry through the novels of Jules Verne, and he became interested in science fiction and a keen reader of pulp magazines like Amazing Stories, which led to his early interest in rocketry. Um, and I guess I'm not going to dive down into that any further uh, because of the fact that those were kinds of things that were of interest to the creators of the secret. Okay, so this guy was known for explosives. He was an expert. He was the head of the lab that was considered the Suicide Squad uh, because they were always blowing things up in the laboratory, um, including liquid fuel rocket stuff um, and other things. There's a connection to Roswell, New Mexico here, where some of these explosive devices. He also uh, was an expert witness in the trial of Captain Earl Kennett, who died or who had planned a plot to set a car bomb off. And he, in fact, backward engineered the bomb and demonstrated in front of the jury. He got involved in the Eurojet project. He worked at March Air Force Base in Moreno Valley, California. Um, so on August 12th of 1941, America's first rocket-assisted fixed-wing aircraft, an Air ERCO air coupe lifted with a Galset-developed solid propellant J-2 booster. So that happened out of the J-2 development. And again, I'm talking about this guy because he often consulted with and communicated with Werner von Braun. And so that's why I'm bringing that up. So he founded the JPL, Jet Propulsion Lab. There's a whole L. Ron Hubbard thing if you want to go into that. He lost his FBI clearance because of the Red Scare. And he died in 1952. Parson decided to travel to Mexico for a few months for vacation. And he was there to establish an explosive factory for the Mexican government. They have the hope that this would facilitate a move to Israel, where Parsons could bypass the U.S. government to recommence his rocketry career. He was particularly disturbed by the presence of the FBI, convinced that they were spying on him. On June 17th, a day before the planned departure, Parsons received a rush order of explosives for a film set and began to work on it in his home laboratory. An explosion destroyed the lower part of the building, during which Parsons sustained mortal wounds. His right forearm was amputated, his leg and left arms were broken, and a hole was torn in the right side of his face. Despite these critical injuries, Parsons was found conscious by the upstairs lodgers. He tried to communicate with the arrival ambulance workers who rushed him to Huntington Memorial Hospital, where he was declared dead approximately 37 minutes after the explosion. When his mother Ruth learned of his death, she immediately took a fatal overdose of barbiturates. I don't know where and how the authors of The Secret found all of these tragic teen angels, but they just keep coming up. The FBI described him as a potentially bisexual person and once expressed experiences in latent homosexuality. Okay, whatever you say. Again, the occult aspect of him, I think, is important too. Who are we talking about? Oh, so these random Incinerate bombings were occurring in the 1970s and 80s. And at Northwestern University, a university police officer was subject to a bombing on the campus, as well as a graduate student. On November 15th, 1979, uh, an American Airlines flight 444 from Chicago to Washington, D.C., an explosion occurred mid flight. Actual explosions mid flight on planes were very rare. There was a lot of hijackings, but not many actual explosives. So this affected 12 passengers who had smoke inhalation. And those injuries weren't lethal, fortunately. On June 10th of 1980 in Lake Forest, uh, the president of United Airlines, Percy Wood, uh, received severe cuts and burns over most of his body and face due to a bombing. And finally, October 8th, 1981, in Utah, at the University of Utah, again, beehives, Utah, explosive things, a bomb was defused. And perhaps, if you like 82 and bombings, uh, that may have happened before the book came out, you have Vanderbilt University, where another bombing occurred, and you have July 2nd, 1982, at the University of California at Berkeley, where Diogenes Angelakis, an engineering professor, had severe burns and shrapnel wounds to his hands and his face. So these were the work of some bomber that was yet to be determined or discovered. He, I think, at this point in time, had been discovered as having similarities between these bombings, and the man got put on the um, most wanted list. So in 1978, a package bearing a Chris return address was found in the parking lot at the University of Illinois at Chicago. In 79, a bomb that was placed in Flight 444 got the FBI involved. And in 1981, the package bearing the return Brigham Young University was the one that was there. Okay, so we later found out that these bombs were all placed by the same person, but that discovery would not come until many or a decade or more later. Any conversation concerning space travel would not be complete without talking about the first person to walk on the moon, which was Neil Armstrong. And so, other than the fact that he was born in Ohio, spent much of his life in Ohio, and taught at the University of Cincinnati in Ohio, I'm not going to work through all of the details about um, about Mr. Armstrong, other than to say that after his service with the Navy, Armstrong returned to Purdue University. He previously earned good but not outstanding grades, now improved, lifting his final grade point average to a respectable but not outstanding 4.8 out of 6.0. He pledged the Phi Delta Theta fraternity and lived in his fraternity's house. He wrote and co-directed two musicals as part of an all-student review. The first was a version of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, co-directed with his girlfriend, Joan Alford, from the Alpha Chi Omega sorority, with songs from the Walt Disney film, including Someday My Prince Will Come. The second was titled The Land of Egalock. That's collards for you sleuths. With music from Gilbert and Sullivan, but new lyrics. He was the chairman of the Purdue Aero Flying Club. Of course he was. So, I don't know. That's just a little fun about his time at uh, there. Okay. All right. Well, that's Neil Armstrong. Uh, there's one image that has what I thought to have been a hazmat suit helmet on the top of the image figure. Mainly the one that George W. thinks is in St. Augustine. If we could all just at this point in time come to the agreement that the reason that the horse and rider has the funny looking helmet detail is that that is a space flight suit helmet, and that all and future efforts to find this should be focused at a location that's closer to Kennedy, that's closer to Cape Canaveral, than further north in a place where you might find a fountain of youth and need a diving helmet. So if we just think that that's no longer a diving helmet or a hazmat suit and accept it as being part of a uh, the first man on the moon's uniform, I think we'll be maybe closer to dissecting that one. We go and circle back to the match, which is shown here of the figure. He's holding a strike on the box type of match. This takes us back to our days in Akron, Ohio. This takes us again just moving laterally really from Neil Armstrong over to the the Diamond Match Company, Akron, Ohio. And the guy that consolidated all these companies' name was Barber. And we saw a Barber. So the Barber Match Company of Akron, Ohio, is renamed the company and established the trade product, the Diamond Match Company. So he took all of the matchmakers, matchmaker, make me a match. Anyway, so remember we saw a barber cutting the hair in the Pythagorean. I don't know if there's some overlap here between the Pythagorean and the military's SALT treaty program. That probably all came out of the Pentagon, if you will. Okay, folks, let me see if that's it. I think that's it. I think I've covered everything that I wanted to. The only other reference I would say that Douglas MacArthur famously would smoke a pipe, corncob pipe, as did Popeye. And we already know that Popeye, we know who Popeye is. Popeye is Sandy Duncan, unless Popeye is Valetti, who was sitting in a car next to Bath Beach Park when a lone gunman, son of Sam, came calling as he was making out with his girlfriend in his car. And he was shot in the eye and he was left blind. In other words, he had his eye pop out. Okay, I know that's kind of rude. I know it's kind of crude, but it's factual history. And I'm trying to base my solve on factual history, not what something John Jude Palancar told me in confidence. Okay, folks, that's going to do it. Let's see if anybody joined in. No takers. Well, I'm getting to make all these about an hour now, but as my research skills get better, I seem to get better and better at pinning down what the authors and artists were up to. And in this particular one, they were up to showing us the beehive. They were up to showing us the tabernacle. They were up to showing us some Mormons. They were up to showing us another general. And they transitioned out of the information that was mainly directed at Fort Knox and Louisville, Kentucky, successfully into pointing us to the Mormon Trail and leading us out to Salt Lake City. And when we take up this again, we will either go back to North Carolina or to Texas and look at the Jack-o'-lectern. So look forward to that time where we can meet again. Thank you so much for coming over and have a good day.